Good morning to everybody, right? My name is Santiago. I work at Party, and today we're going to be talking with this, I'd call it panel of experts, right? Or panel of experienced people in the role of becoming a parachain, right? And a parachain on Polkadot can mean a lot of things. But before we get started, I would very much like to give you the opportunity, guys, to introduce yourselves, to introduce your project, tell us a bit more what you guys are doing, and then we're going to dive into the actual questions. So should we go by order? Do you want to go first, Nahu?
Hi, my name is Nahu. I'm a software architect at Aventus. I am also part of the team that built the Aventus network chain and all the ecosystem tools. Aventus provides enterprise-grade offering for various clients in different industries. We have gaming and loyalty systems. We are interoperable with Ethereum, and we've been running our mainnet for a couple of years. It was a sovereign chain, and now we are sort of migrating into becoming a parachain.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. Corey.
I'm Corey. I'm with Water, and we're building a commodities-focused parachain, particularly around ethical commodities. Also, we're starting to rename that to programmable commodities. The goal being to bring the commodities onto the blockchain, and there's a few reasons for that. You know, why would we want to do commodities? A couple things. One is it's a $17 trillion industry, almost 20% of the global GDP. And currently, it's not doing great work for the environment, for the planet, and we want to be able to change that and really kind of make sure these commodities are more ethically sourced. And also, the commodities industry, quite frankly, is pretty broken. It's fragmented, it's opaque, it's inefficient, and we think we can do better using a parachain to do that. To give you a couple examples, one is Apple is currently looking at buying carbon-free aluminum, and wouldn't it be great if we could provide that certificate and information on a blockchain technology and allow that aluminum to be available not just to Apple but to others in the future. And the one example I like to use also is related to eggs. When I go to the grocery store and I buy eggs, I can buy just plain old eggs. I can buy organic eggs, I can buy cage-free eggs, I can buy free-range eggs, and each one of those has a different price. And what we want to do is take more commodities and make that kind of choice available to consumers, and therefore influence the price, give feedback to either the farmers or the miners on kind of what consumers want, and be able to drive change for kind of the ethical aspects of commodities through that.
So. That's very cool. Thank you very much, Corey. I like the term programmable commodities that you put in there. And the other thing that I would like to do is, it's nothing to do with becoming a parachain, but if anybody likes numbers here, do some research on why we buy things by the dozen. You were talking about the eggs, and why do we buy eggs by the dozen? Just some homework. And what about you, Harald? Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Harald Heckmann. I'm working at Zeitgeist as a lead blockchain engineer. And at Zeitgeist, we want to utilize the wisdom of the crowds through prediction markets. So essentially, you want to attain some information about something, and you can launch a market on our Parachain. And people can provide their information into the market by buying and selling outcome tokens. And they are incentivized by providing good information and disincentivized by providing bad information. And out of that, you can basically determine a probability of how likely certain outcomes for the event are. Yes, I think that's in essence what we are doing. That's the foundation. There are already projects like that out there, for example, like Orgon on Ethereum, but we want to bring it one step further by providing a novel governance mechanism called Footer Key, which will utilize the prediction market functionality as a foundation. And essentially, what it will do is that it provides you the means to find optimal decisions for some problem you want to solve by utilizing the prediction markets in a nutshell. And this functionality should be provided also through every other parachain that wants to use it via XCM in the end. I think that's in essence what we do. And yeah, I was asked by a couple of people who have been at Amsterdam to Amsterdam this year in April to keep up the culture. So I will do this right now, and I'm already sorry for everybody who will feel tortured by that. But yeah, I'll give it a try anyways. So what I did at Amsterdam is to do some beatbox related to the conference, and that's what I'm trying to do right now. So please bear with me.
Zero. Zero. This is Sub0.
So good. Wow.
Thanks, much appreciated. Shout out to everybody who's here, and especially to the guys who encouraged me to do this.
Yeah, love it. I love this, right? Very well done, very well done. I love this because it's a very nice segue to something that I wanted to bring up, right? You guys presented, it is, bear with me for a minute, it is. You're gonna see why in like 2 sentences. You guys were talking about your parachains, right? And I think that in here, in this panel right here, we have 3 very different paths to becoming a parachain. We have the solo chain that was a sidechain to Ethereum and then decided to come and build and become a parachain on Polkadot. You guys went directly for the Polkadot slot. Sidechain is all about community, hence the reference here. It's smart from my end. And you guys are a Kusama parachain, right? So you started off with Kusama, you went directly for Polkadot, you started as a solo chain. 3 very distinct paths to becoming a parachain. So what I would very much like to know from you guys is, let's start from the most technical perspective. Why is it that you decided to become a parachain, right? Building on in the blockchain space can mean a lot of different things. Building on Polkadot can take a lot of different ways or shapes. Why is it that you decided to become a parachain? What was in there? Nahu, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, for us, we started life on Ethereum as a smart contract, and then we ended up having a sovereign chain built with Substrate, because at the time Substrate had modular offering and it was just so much easier to use. So we ran that for a few years, and then Parachains came out. So I think as a company we believe in Polkadot's idea of creating an interoperable community of chains. That's what we believe in, and that's why we have kept our interoperability with Ethereum as well. But the second reason, I think, is the security offerings that running a parachain gives you. So you have the relay chain kind of taking care of all the validation logic about the validity of the chain, giving you that level of security that you wouldn't have otherwise, because it's no easy thing running a network. And worrying about the security of your validators, making sure they act accordingly without being able to force them, is a challenge on its own. So having a relay chain that does that for you makes sense. The other reason is because most of our clients are organizations and businesses, and they have their own end users as well, right? So we build a lot of things to lower the barrier of entry for them. So we act as a backend, and because their end users don't know anything about blockchain and you don't want to burden them with crypto stuff and none of the complexities, we build a lot of tooling to ease the on-ramp for those clients. So by becoming a parachain and having access to all this community of chains, we hope that we can extend that functionality to the wider parachain community as well. We saw in the panel earlier, there's a lot of great advancements on the communication between the parachains. So if we can sort of extend our functionality, the gateway basically, to the wider Polkadot parachain community, then it's all better for everybody. Yeah. So I think that's that.
That's very interesting, right? So you mentioned two particular aspects there, right? The fact that running your own sovereign chain, it's very, very hard, right? And leveraging from that security from Polkadot definitely allows you to maybe sleep better at night.
Yeah, definitely.
And also the fact that you can interoperate with this network of heterogeneous chains, right? But this is sort of like the path from that solo chain world to the Parachain world. But what about Kusama for Sidecase? Why did you guys decide to become a Parachain, and why Kusama first? What were you looking for there?
Yeah, we decided, so actually in the beginning, Zeitgeist was a standalone chain. The very first network was a standalone chain, okay. But then we started to migrate slowly towards a Parachain. And the reason for that is mainly that we wanted to have the interoperability amongst all other Parachains. I think that is one of the biggest reasons. So since we want to provide like a governance mechanism that can be utilized, of course, utilized out of consensus and off-chain, we also wanted to provide that basically within a consensus mechanism via XCM. So you could utilize the governance mechanism in all other parachains and ensure that everything that happens there is really based on governance decisions that were based on footer key that we provided within the shared consensus engine. So I think that was one of the biggest reasons. And of course, we also like, since we provide buckets, we also benefit like from the functionality from other chains. For example, the possibility to use other currencies like stablecoins, for example, or to provide our functionality in smart contract platforms, for example, in the EVM, potentially inside Moonbeam or some other project like that. And yeah, I think this is the biggest reason why we did it, but also like having the shared security given by Polkadot essentially for free is helping a lot to bootstrap this secure network and move on from there, don't having to worry about all these aspects at this point. Yeah.
That's very cool, and we're going to get back to some of the things that you just mentioned there. You mentioned this idea of security for almost free, right? I'm interested in what you think about that, and I'm going to dive into that in a minute, but building a parachain on Polkadot is not only a technical decision, right? There's also a more business decision or community decision. So what was that process for you, Corey, when you guys decided to become a Parachain on Polkadot?
Sure, a few things. I mean, first of all, just to echo some of the things they said, we did want the shared security, we did want to be part of the larger ecosystem, we want to work with many of you to build out kind of our ecosystem around commodities. But a couple other things we wanted, one is the environmental impact of the blockchain itself, which is really important given kind of our mission, and the other one is how do we build kind of our platform, you know, starting with kind of the node template or the things that kind of gave us a base building blocks, but we wanted to further customize that from a commodities perspective and make it easier for people to build commodity-specific tokens and things like that on top of that. So, you know, we saw the benefit of starting with something that was already kind of built to some regards, and then we can customize it and add a lot of functionality on top of that, and it was really a cost-efficient solution for us to take that approach. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And thank you very much for pointing that out. But you all three talked about shared security, you talked about interoperability. I'm a bit curious on what's your opinion on the role that shared security plays for this interoperability that you're looking for? How important is that on this sort of like architecture that Polkadot provides to all the parachains? Yeah, go.
I think it's huge because you spend less energy worrying about securing your chain, making sure your validators are not misbehaving and none of that. And focusing on the business logic that you want to implement in your parachain. So, as someone new that wants to join the parachain world, one of the advantages or one of the attractiveness of the parachain is having exactly that, the security aspect of it being taken care of for you and almost for free without you doing anything about it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a big plus.
Why almost for free?
Yeah, because essentially, like the relay chain that you are onboarded on as a parachain, it will verify a proof that has been provided by your parachain that the state transition that happened is correct. So, if the relay chain the validators on the relay chain that are assigned to your parachain say, well, this state transition is invalid, then the block that is associated to that state transition is rejected. So it's much more difficult to cheat the system because there's so much there are so many validators and there's so much money already involved in Polkadot compared to a project that just starts. So we have that security by the validators there. But maybe just to give another perspective, it's not always just flowers and rainbows, of course. It's also a big commitment of trust in Polkadot or Kusama and the people behind it that develop it, that make it happen. Because if anything would go dramatically wrong there, everybody could be screwed potentially at once. Assuming that somebody would gain root privileges somehow on Polkadot or Kusama through an exploit, they could do anything to the parachains. They could make them stall, they could change the states potentially. So this is like also a big commitment and a big commitment of trust, especially in a good and thorough work in the team behind Polkadot and Kusama.
Yeah, that's,
for the people. Yeah, that work.
I definitely agree with that, right? I would say that that's even true for almost all of these systems out there as well. So a question that I have is, before deciding on becoming a Parachain on Polkadot, have you looked into other systems? Have you saw other options out there, if anything, for building your systems?
I think our case is slightly different because we had a sovereign chain running on substrates. We kind of were familiar with the whole environment. And I mean, we were happy running the solo chain for a few years. We've had a few million transactions, a few million accounts. But it's the attractiveness for us is all the properties of a parachain basically, and the fact that you tap into all the connected parachains and have access to them. Mm-hmm. So it was a natural transition for us.
Okay, makes sense. What about you, Corey?
Yeah, so I've worked with Ethereum and Hyperledger Fabric in the past, and to me this is kind of a superior solution for us from a technology perspective. One is, like I said, it gives us a lot of flexibility around the commodities we're building and the things we want to customize on top of that, which we don't get with some of the other ones. And Hyperledger Fabric is a whole other story. They're not really set up to do tokenization at all, and so that's a real challenge to even try and build tokens on. So like I said, it's been very seamless for us to build on a Parachain on Polkadot.
And did you guys look into other solutions for Sidecased?
Yeah, I mean, there was the possibility to build on Ethereum, and so it's like, it doesn't offer that kind of interoperability that the Polkadot ecosystem does. You're basically forced to just live inside the Ethereum ecosystem, and otherwise you have to use like some more complex solutions to get outside of Ethereum, to communicate outside of Ethereum that didn't promise the security that XAM did in the beginning, and also like there's it's not like, I mean, it's not 100% clear if the scalability issues will be resolved in any time, and so we knew we wouldn't have that problem when starting with on Polkadot. What also was a great plus was that there's this substrate, this development framework, which is written in Rust. It provides you some great properties, like you don't have to worry about memory management and some memory leaks or segmentation faults that you could do invalid memory as this is, because that's inherently provided by Rust. I mean, you can still get into that situation, but you have to explicitly state in your code that you're moving into that part where it could happen. Yeah, so this was also a big plus to get started there. With the substrate framework.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we went through like why becoming a Parachain for you guys, right? Which, in my opinion, when building a project or deciding how to start the project, that is the first question that I would ask. Like, how am I going to build this, right? And I think it's clear for me why is it that you decided to become a Parachain. You guys mentioned interoperability, you mentioned shared security, you mentioned customizability, you mentioned substrate. But let's go a little bit deeper, right? So now you decided to become a Parachain. How was that building phase of the Parachain, right? How did that look like? And a little bit of context for the people that might not know here. right now, the way of building parachains is using this framework called Substrate that Harald was talking about. So maybe if you can enlighten us a little bit about, okay, this is how it actually looked to start building this parachain. And I'm going to break the flow. You, Corey, go first.
All right, so building on Parachain. Honestly, it's been pretty smooth. Now, we've been working very closely with Parity to do the development. Obviously, they know a lot about the platform and how to build. We've been providing, and then, like I said, customization on top of that. That development's been pretty straightforward, building additional palettes that we can plug in around kind of asset identity and some of those functionality we want from a commodities perspective. Getting it up and running. We're using the Rococo testnet, so getting it up and running on there has been relatively seamless. We do support both Substrate or WASM and also EVM as well. And again, the palettes that come out of the box have been pretty straightforward and easy set up for us, so haven't really seen a lot of issues.
Okay, right. So you mentioned palettes there. What are those and how did you use them? And you mentioned specifically like EVM, you mentioned palettes contracts for WASM's contracts.
So we're using somewhere around 15 palettes, I think, that come out of the node template there. Everything from governance to contracts to assets to all that kind of stuff. EVM is also a palette, actually. There's an Ethereum and EVM palette on top of that as well. So we've been using all of those palettes. Basically, they're libraries that get compiled into the node and that then run kind of native or kind of at a base layer to everything we build on top of that. And then we're building or working with dapps and things to build tokens on top of that, smart contracts on top of that.
Right, interesting. It's this sort of like plug and play thing that you can use, right? The libraries that you can add into your runtime. I'm not a developer myself, right? So what I might say might not make a lot of sense, but I always think of them as like NPM packages for JavaScript, right? You just can do like sort of like NPM install in a way.
Yeah, or to date myself, DLLs for Windows, any of the old libraries that you would install for, they get compiled into the code, yeah.
That's very fair. What about for you guys at Sidegates, Harald? How's that journey of actually, okay, I know this is a parachain, I'm just going to start from the node template maybe of whatever you started, I'm going to write the first line of code. How did that look like?
Yeah.
The good and the bad.
Okay, yeah, so, we could get started quite fast. That's a really great thing to have the palettes. It's for free, open source. And so we start with a standalone node. It is relatively simple because you have less dependencies to like other things, like other systems. So we start with a standalone node. We could get started quite fast with a lot of palettes. And from that on, we pretty soon launched our first testnet, the battery park, after not even half a year of development. And we had the core prediction marker functionality out there. Of course, it's not perfect at that point, and there's still a lot of work to do, but it was really fast.
That's fast, though.
Really fast process, yeah. So after that, we decided we want to move to Kusama. And we like Kusama a lot because it's like a fast-paced environment where a lot of innovation happens first, and things just move fast forward. And we were in the same position at that time. Like the development speed was like insane. I'm really proud and happy that we did it in such a short time. And one of the reasons for that was that there was so much available at the time to build on already. So after having the standalone node, we decided to move on Kusama, and for that you need a relay chain. At first we onboarded on the Rococo relay chain, which is thought to use to test your Parachain, but back then it was not really...
A long time ago, yeah.
Not really stable, so there were plenty of resets and so on, and this has changed by now. Rococo is a relatively stable network now, and back then it wasn't, so we made the decision we will spawn our own relay chain. So we just used the Polkadot repository on GitHub and launched our own Rococo relay chain, and then we were free to test out that stuff without all the resets and with having more by having more control during the development process. And I must admit, when we swapped from a standalone chain to a Parachain, the project got immensely more complex because
Okay.
all of the sudden you have this counterpart, the relay chain. You have additional dependencies that you have to maintain regularly because if you don't, it could happen that your Parachain doesn't produce blocks anymore, it just breaks. You have, you all of a sudden have the cumulus subsystem, which basically marries your Parachain and the relay chain in one node and makes them communicate all the essential information that's necessary basically to have a flawless and consistent process. And in the beginning it was quite harsh and a lot of tears were lost at that time, but it paid out in the end for the things that it gave us. Yeah.
That you get in return. Yeah, that makes sense. And I saw you, Nahu, that you were saying yes when he was saying, now I've got a lot of dependencies right from my solo chain to my Parachain. Did you guys feel that same pain?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think what made it a bit complicated for us is, as I said, we've been running this solo chain for a couple of years. You can imagine the customization that goes in it and the tweaks that you do over the years. And when we started to look at how to become a Parachain, first thing we did is, okay, what do we need to change on our solo chain to be compatible? And in theory, it was fairly simple, wasn't it? Like a couple of functions, like you export, or you create an interface for a validate function and tell the relay chain what your business logic is, and you can get it done. But yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that, because effectively you have Polkadot, you have Cumulus, and then you have Substrate all coming together in your Parachain. So we tried to kind of like plug in specifically the bits that we need in our solo chain, soon realized that we'd be there for months basically doing it. So what we decided to do instead is recreate the whole thing from the ground up. And one of the advantages of Substrate being so modular is you can decompose it and bring it back up again fairly easily. So we started with the templates with all the basic dependencies in place, and then we added our business logic on top of that, and that kind of took care of most of the dependencies and the hassle of configuring everything yourself, basically.
Okay.
So that way was much better in the end.
Okay. It seems like the journey changes a little bit if you start just from the Parachain code, or if you migrate from that solo chain to the Parachain, right? You guys didn't feel that same pain, right, Corey?
No, we didn't, but also, like I said, we had Parity very heavily developing with us. You know, if I were to give some things that we could do better, maybe some of the documentation around some of this stuff is probably could be a little bit better.
Yeah. We're going to get into that wish list at the very end, and I know that you guys have some things that you would like to add the whole community to see if we can build. But one thing that I'm interested in as well, there, Harald, that you mentioned is this idea of palettes, right? So you, Corey, were talking about you guys using a lot of palettes. You probably built some yourselves as well. You know who were mentioning about building your palettes too. And you said, Harald, that this building palettes is quite straightforward and quite easy. So what can you tell us a little bit more about that, about the actual like coding that palette, that piece of functionality?
Yeah, so first of all, by now, there already exists great documentation of every aspect of the palette development or runtime development in general. Back in 2020, it was still a bit more difficult because not everything was transparently documented, but by now it is, and you can get started fairly easy. So palette development, the palette is basically a module that's executed within the runtime of the blockchain. And the runtime it contains the business logic or the state transition logic of the chain you are developing. So when developing this module of the runtime, the palette, you have a pretty clear structure. You have some storage that you can modify, so you can basically change the state of the palette through the storage. You can clearly define it, and this how in the back the storage is changed by writing it is abstracted away from you. You don't have to worry about that. You just basically insert something, mutate some state, fetch some state. Pretty straightforward without having all these low-level stuff. So it's abstracted away and basically accelerates the development. Then inside you have basically a part that contains the possible calls through transactions, the dispatchable functions, where you can get some inputs through a transaction. For example, in case of a balance transfer, you would get the information who wants to transfer it and where does he wants to transfer it or she, and how much should be transferred. So based on that, you can, within that dispatchable function, you can take that information and manipulate the storage in the fast and easy way because it's abstracted. And this is like the part where you specify how the outside world can basically change the internal state within your consensus engine. And then there's also another section, it's the palette implementation itself that offers functionality that can be shared amongst the palettes. So other palettes could call into your palette directly through these implementations and also retrieve some information or do state modifications to that. And it's pretty structured and straightforward. So they did a great job there with the design.
That's very interesting, right? So sort of like the recommendation maybe from what we're gathering here in this road to a Parachain, right, is start off with maybe the Parachain template at the very beginning and write your first palette, right? Start interacting with these macros in Rust that function sort of like an API, if you wish, of sorts, right? And you can start calling these different internals of the node that maybe you do not even need to touch, but then your just chain starts working, right? And you can, in 6 months, as you guys were saying, have a product that can go live and can start producing blocks and offering a product to the overall ecosystem. Yes, Corey?
I was going to say, the great thing about it is you can write your own palettes that plug into the system, or you can change the palettes that are there.
Exactly.
If you see the governance palette, you don't like it, throw it out and build your own.
Exactly.
So you can really pick and choose, and so I think that I agree, the modular design was really well done and easy to modify.
Even with that example, right? If you like the governance palette but not all of it, just use a part of it, right? And it's easy to instantiate and easy to use. Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that you guys mentioned was the customizability of it, right? And we were talking right here, right now about this fact of like palettes adding, changing, whatever. But there's sort of like this other characteristic that blockchains usually have, that in order to make a change on the actual like code of the blockchain, it's quite cumbersome, right? And we're talking about building parachains, which essentially are layer 1 blockchains connected to this one relay chain. So in the way that you're thinking your product for the future, if you think about your product in the next couple of years, what role does this idea of upgrades that you can do to your runtime actually play in that sort of like forward thinking of actually building a product for your users in the end? What do you think now?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think, because one of the things I really liked is how backwards compatible parachains are in comparison to a solo chain. So a lot of the palettes would just work out of the box. So we didn't have the hassle of extra customization just to make it compatible in a parachain world. I know there are some palettes that you have to change slightly, but most of them worked out of the box. So that was really good. But going forward, so because of the ability of forkless upgrades, any kind of improvement change you want to do is a lot easier to organize and coordinate, because without that you have the hassle of forks and all the communication and everything that goes on to push in one improvement. But forkless upgrades are amazing. I mean, they work on a solo chain and now they also work on parachains as well. So it means you can evolve your product, you can pace yourself, make sure things work before you move on to the next one. So I think that's really good.
What are forkless upgrades, Corey? I saw you nodding there. So what are?
Well, I was going to say, in addition to that, also on the token side, having worked with Ethereum, if you want to make a change to your contract, you have to build proxy contracts and then update, so the address doesn't change. All that kind of stuff is taken away on the Polkadot side. So we can make changes to the contract and not have to worry about a big, complicated upgrade process on the token side as well. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to segue a little bit from here, right? Because you mentioned smart contracts there, and I also want to talk about your teams altogether, right? I would very much argue that when you build a layer 1 parachain, a layer 1 blockchain as a parachain, the team needs that you have might be a little bit different than what you need for a smart contract team, right? Because you need to take care of different stuff. How do your teams look like, and what was that process for you on this road of becoming a parachain? What does the Zeitgeist team look like right now? What sort of roles do you have in there?
You mean overall or just in technical?
Let's start with the technical side. Like, what roles do you think you needed for being a parachain that you might have not needed when you were building a smart contract, for example?
So one thing that, so when you're just building a smart contract, you don't need a client, you don't need a node. You have that already. For example, the Ethereum node, it's available and it does all the networking stuff, the exchanging the blocks and everything. You don't have that when developing smart contracts. When developing a parachain, you have to take care of your client. Although it's there are also like a lot of clients out there that are built on the same framework and they are templates, and it's not like you have to invent the wheel from nothing again. So I would say it's something that's necessary, but it's nothing that that is utterly complex and requires a lot of resources. Other than that, I think I would say it's quite similar. Like you have the palette, your palettes, your state transition logic inside of it. You need an SDK to abstract it away to developers who want to use it, and then you have the front end who that displays all the information in a way that the user can easily process and interpret. Yeah.
What about at Aventus? Does this team look very different? How is your team right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences so you obviously need your engineers to write your code and all of that stuff, which is the same. But now we have a decent sized DevOps team. Okay. Because you have this whole requirement to run your nodes, make sure they're up and running, and they're like in sync and all of that stuff. With a bunch of monitoring that you need as well. I mean, in theory, you could write a smart contract on Ethereum and just forget about it as long as it does what you want it to do. But if you have a parachain, you have a node running, there's various metrics you need to keep an eye on and all of that stuff. So there's that aspect of it. We have a few dapps, for example. So you need some front-endy people to look after those as well. But that's part of the community of products you have around your chain, basically, right?
Yeah. So maybe in that sort of like regard, the one difference that I could point out is have somebody that could look into making sure that the nodes are up and running, because then front end and actually building the stuff, it's pretty straightforward for both cases, right? So that might be the one difference to just take into consideration when building a parachain right now. That makes sense. Any other thoughts for you, Corey?
Yeah, no, I think we covered a lot of it. I think a couple DevOps people, a couple back-end people who preferably know Rust would be pretty good. I think obviously a security person, just kind of keeping an eye on all the security behind what you're building is important, is probably all I would add.
Yeah, but it's not a crazy overhead, right? It's pretty straightforward and something that can be very achievable. That's very cool, right? So to sum up a little bit, we went from the why do we build the parachain, right? So we talked about interoperability, we talked about shared security, we talked about the customizability aspect of these parachains. Then we went into, all right, let's start from the parachain code, let's write our first palette, let's integrate with other palettes. We talked about the team, we talked about forkless upgrades. I think it was a very dense and full of information panel, so thank you guys very much for that. And I would very much like to end with your wish lists, right? So if you were to wish something from the community altogether for the next year, for your projects, what would that be? So who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I think there's probably two primary things, and I think a lot of these have already been covered in the conference so far. And one is kind of liquidity on the parachains in general. Getting more liquidity in our network would be helpful. And the other one is, and some of this was discussed with Alex and German yesterday about kind of tokenization standards. And a lot of people we're talking to are using EVM, and I think a big reason they're using EVM, one is they've already built on EVM, but also because there's kind of ERC20 and some standards around that. And I think as a community, I think we probably need to do something about how we build WASM tokens so that they're readable by multiple kind of, whether those are bridges or wallets, those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm going to make a note out of that, because one thing that I also want to bring everybody's attention towards is the Polkadot forum, right? And I think that these sort of discussions can definitely happen in the forum. And the idea is that everybody has a voice there, and we can all discuss and see what we think is the best for the network and come into consensus, not real mathematical consensus, but people like consensus on what do we think is best and try it out, right? That's the whole point of it. So yeah, you guys, what's your wish list from the community and from anybody?
Yes. I'm an engineer at heart, and I just love to see like how, from the technical perspective, how the Parachain teams most of the time work very closely together and support each other. And I think we all share closely the same big picture about where we're heading and hopes we're associated. And I would just wish that we try to reduce the competition to a necessary minimum and just try to be cooperative and assist each other and help each other out to move forward together as we create more value if we cooperate more closely with each other and just build a greater product overall. I would wish that not just the Parachain teams do this, but that the community does it, that we find ways to involve the community in this whole process, and that we work together towards a common goal. There's, for example, this open runtime module library repository, and it doesn't really belong, like as far as I know, it doesn't really belong to a company or an entity. It's just a repository that's maintained by developers from many different Parachain teams, and when somebody realizes that something is missing in the ecosystem and is utterly needed, they just spend their time to develop it together and provide it for anybody. And this accelerates the progress immensely. It helps out everybody, and this is just a great thing. And I would wish that we move more towards that direction. Yeah. And another thing is closely related to what you just said. That when we implemented the reserve asset transfers via XCM, we realized there are like 500 different implementation rounds. I'm over-exaggerating. So many implementations do not exist, but so many different ways to solve the same problem. And also, I would wish that we start to develop more and more standards to how to do things, so we can more easily start to interact with each other in a way that's standardized before.
Yeah, definitely. If I could put an emoji right now to the like strong community stuff, I would the 100 emoji. I definitely agree with that, right? Having a strong community is definitely something that we all need. I do believe that Polkadot's community is quite strong, but let's keep building it, let's keep making it stronger, and we're all gonna pursue for a better future, I guess. But yeah, last but not least, what's Aventus wish lists, Nahu's wish lists?
I would say there's a lot of cool tech coming out of Polkadot and you know, maybe Parity and all the other teams. And it looks like you guys are not scared of making big changes, big refactorings, which is great. It pushes the product forward. But the documentation that covers all of that sometimes lags a bit behind. So maybe not just Polkadot or Parity, but a community-wide effort to keep that keep the pace of the documentation with the product changes that come would help other teams definitely understand some of the motivation behind the changes, or even give straightforward ability to how do I do this, or what's the thinking behind this feature, that kind of thing. So having that would be great, I think. Perfect.
Noted for the wish list then. All right, then that will be all. Thank you guys very, very much for your time. I really enjoyed this panel. Thank you for your knowledge. And yeah, I guess that if anybody wants to talk further with them, yeah, well, you guys are going to be around, right? All right, cool. Yes. Then thank you all very much, and that's a wrap.
Thanks.